First, we'll hear from Jim Caprero. I met Jim when I came back to Chicago over 23 years ago. I was learning from him then, I'm learning from him now. Jim brings 40 years of community organizing and development experience to his work. In the early 1970s, he worked as a community organizer pursuing the passage of the Home Mortgage Act, better known as HMDA. He also worked to pass the Community Reinvestment Act, and we all know that that's a huge issue of today. Jim has worked on comprehensive community development, strategic planning, community organizing, collaboration and partnership, and nonprofit management. You may recognize Jim as the CEO of Greater Southwest Development Corporation, one of the longest standing economic development, community development corporations in the region. So let's welcome Jim Caprero.
It's 1971. 1971, I was 21 years old. Picture me 35 pounds lighter. I had hair, proud to be a hippie and an anti-war organizer. We won't talk about the Grateful Dead. But those locks were shorn in 1971 when I transitioned to community organizing. In 1971, Emily Thomas, an age 50-something Irish public school teacher in Chicago, and a board member of the Southwest Community Congress, where I worked, walked into a board meeting and told a story that would redirect my life. She had just come from the savings and loan where she had banked for 25 years. Her salary and her husband's union job, coupled with their frugality, allowed them to build up their savings and pay down over 20 years of their 30-year mortgage note. She assumed there would be no problem purchasing a second house on her block, located just 5 blocks away from where she was sitting with that loan officer. As luck would have it, a deluxe Chicago bungalow on her block, the same home her daughter fell in love with as a little girl so many years ago, was up for sale. Emily and her husband, Jack, intended to give the young couple a super wedding present, a home of their own, the American dream. Emily had already put up the earnest money and signed a real estate contract. That afternoon, Emily, Jack, and the young couple went to their trusty S&L, Savings and Loan, to secure the financing. She took great care to explain that both couples were buying the home together. Emily and Jack would withdraw the savings to pay the 20% down payment, and they would co-sign the mortgage note with the younger couple. She expected to walk out of that S&L with a verbal commitment, contingent on a home inspection and home appraisal. After all, for 20-plus years, she and Jack had never, ever been late on a mortgage payment. That evening, when I saw Emily, when she walked into the board meeting, she was feeling dejected and she was angry. The response from the S&L loan officer: we're not lending east of Western Avenue. It's now an FHA neighborhood. If you were to purchase west of Western Avenue, we'd be happy to take your application. As Emily told her story, we really didn't know what was going on, but we knew it did not feel right. What is an FHA neighborhood? Never heard of that before. The odd thing was the statement about Western Avenue. Emily's block was 2 streets east of Western Avenue. We asked ourselves, what's the difference? What's the difference between the blocks east of Western and 2 blocks west of Western Avenue? Literally 4 blocks apart. As we examined this question, we concluded there wasn't much difference. We actually aborted our agenda for that board meeting and just talked about this. We looked east of Western, we looked west of Western, and as we talked, we said, wow, same schools, same churches, same retail corridor, same access to employment, same parks, same recreation, same healthcare provider, Holy Cross Hospital, the anchor institution that Senator Durbin talked about, was 4 blocks away. Everything was the same, except one thing. There was only one difference we could identify. In the past year or two, Emily's block and the blocks around it to the east of Western had just received some new neighbors. These new neighbors just happened to be African American. The only difference we could identify was race. So our community organization went to work. We sought a meeting with the SNL and they refused, as did other local financial institutions. We started bringing a mixed race crowd of a couple hundred people, neighborhood people, to their lobbies every Saturday. Sometimes our folks would open new accounts and then immediately close them, jamming up the teller lines. Let me tell you what happened the first time we went to that savings and loan. It was called Chicago Savings and Loan. The first time we went, we had over 200 people in a not very big lobby. There was, shoulder to shoulder, and we went in and we demanded a meeting with the CEO of that savings and loan, who was upstairs, and he refused to come down. Now, we were kind of young and dumb, and so we're all there, and what do we do? What do we do now? He's not coming down. And we kind of thought, well, we own the place because nobody can get in the front door, or nobody can get down the staircase because we're so crowded. And so we're just all standing there, and it was a very awkward moment until a fella from the West Englewood part of our neighborhood, an African-American older man named Philip, sat down on the floor, and he started to sing. We shall overcome. And by the time people heard them, they started to sit down. And they started to sing, we shall overcome. And then everybody was sitting down, including customers who had just come to the bank to bank that day. And everybody was singing, we shall overcome someday. And the next song was, we shall not be moved. And we were not moved until the police came and actually moved us out. But that was 3 hours later, and their office hours were over for that day. During the week, we would pick random hours on random days when our folks would make hundreds of phone calls, effectively jamming their switchboards. That's when you still had people plugging plugs to connect folks. When you open an account at a savings and loan, you were a co-owner. These were mutually owned associations. So we went door to door, block by block, throughout the neighborhood, getting people to revoke the proxies that they had given away when they signed the cards when they opened the account. And this forced banks and savings and loans in the neighborhood to hold their annual board meetings in public movie theaters. Marquette Theater held 995 people, and we overfilled it for the Republic Savings Board of Directors meetings. But soon, we recognized that this fight was bigger than just our neighborhood. In fact, we came to realize it was bigger than just the city of Chicago. And so we joined with other community organizations across the city and across the country to organize against lending discrimination. We gathered behind National People's Action under the leadership of a housewife and mother of 6 from the Austin community on the west side of Chicago named Gail Sincata. A tough, seasoned community warrior, Gail stewarded the national community assault against urban disinvestment. In 1973, working with the University of Chicago, a research team from U of C and National People's Action documented systematic lending discrimination in communities as they became racially diverse. When people of color moved into neighborhoods, we documented that as they came in, lending left. I worked at National People's Action then, and I was tasked with taking the University of Chicago research to newspapers. I remember sitting in a staff meeting on Division Street where we searched for a term that would brand urban disinvestment as evil. We were looking for a term analogous to racism or racist. We thought about Western Avenue and all the other similar lender map credit boundaries and imagined a red line down the middle of the street. On the right side of the line, credit is available, and on the wrong side of the line, well, no loans for you. Our vile practice moniker came by fusing two words together to become a new verb. This new verb, representing the reprehensible practice, was redlining. Redlining as practiced by redliners. I went off to the Chicago Tribune and met with news reporter Stan Ziemba. His 1973 piece in the Tribune disclosing the results of the University of Chicago research, I believe, is the first time the word redlining ever appeared in print. So a lot has changed over the last 40 years. Okay, 45 pounds. We passed the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act in 1975 and the Community Reinvestment Act in 1977. 40 years later, we have a bona fide community development industry blessed with a robust complement of community and affordable housing developers who are knee-deep in lending partnerships. We heard about them from the podium here this morning. Knee-deep in lending partnerships with CDFIs and others that provide capital to invest in changing lives and transforming places, transforming neighborhoods. I owe an expression of gratitude to Emily Thomas. You know, the last 2 weeks has not been kind to the women of the United States of America. I want to testify. I owe Emily Thomas my deep gratitude. She did redirect my life. I've been blessed to have a wonderful career in the community development, community investment, community revitalization business. Without Emily, I'm sure I would not be here today. And we all owe, every one of us owe an expression of gratitude to Gail Sincata. Without Gail, none of us would be here today. So I would like you to rise. I would like everybody to rise. Stand up in the back, in the front, off to the left, in the middle. Rise. Let's give a standing ovation to two of my personal heroes, Emily Thomas and Gail Sincata. So that's my story. Thanks for listening.